Uh-oh.
Hello to all you sled dog pups out there in YouTube land. Welcome to the Williams Show from Miss Miki's den. She's a Malamute, and she's got her Mark 1 eyeball on me as we speak. Anyway, this is our report for Monday the 28th of August in the year of the Lord 2023. And we have four different reports here, news reports from Ukraine. According to Redacted, Lindsey Graham has talked to Vladimir Zelensky that two things have to happen in Ukraine. First is Ukraine must win. All right. Win the counteroffensive, and Zelensky must have elections. And if he doesn't, Mr. Zelensky shouldn't get any U.S. taxpayer money. The response from President Zelensky is that he has to have taxpayer money, or that they're not going to have a democracy or an election. In other words, they're in a state of emergency, and they're not going to have elections unless they have the support of the U.S. taxpayers, which is a little backwards considering we're supposed to be there to protect democracy. Well, there that goes. Now, according to Judge Napolitano, he's one of the few sites that he says is in opposition to the war in Ukraine, not because he's in opposition to Ukraine being free, but just that he's in opposition to the war because he feels it's more of a moral issue because of the number of casualties. And on his show today, they talked about that there's no independent information or journalism coming out of Ukraine. And besides that, Zelensky keeps going on his road show, and there's no one from the major media like, we had in Vietnam. Walter Cronkite said that he couldn't support the war anymore, and that was the end of the Vietnam War. So what they're talking about on Judge's program was that the first casualty of war is the truth, and that there's been an organized version throughout the internet and in official news, as well as Main Street media, of a version of the war that's been basically the Ukraine's government's official war news. So remember in Ukraine that they've had journalists now that have been arrested and some tortured and others killed. So good information coming out of Ukraine is not easy to come by. Now, according to Redacted, U.S. officials are about to or are now admitting that Ukraine's war they cannot possibly win the war. But that now that has never been the plan. The plan all along was to use, the Ukrainians as proxies. In other words, use every last beating Ukrainian heart to degrade Russia's military, while enriching defense contractors, which is the only part of the plan that has worked according to Redacted. Now, I personally am thankful for our defense contractors in that they've given the United States some very, very good weapons. So I'm not all anti-defense contractors. I am against war for profit, but as far as defense contractors creating weapons for the United States and our allies, I really don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem with the Ukrainian war in that it's not going anywhere, and it's just grinding up human beings. All right, and then according to Deutsche Welle, they have a question. What does the liberation of Robotyne in the Zaporizhia region mean for Ukrainian counteroffensives? Now, the counteroffensive has made it through to Robotyne and got through the first level of the Russian defenses. Now, the Russian defenses, they have 3 different lines of defense. And as you go into, Russians are really smart in that they don't pile up all their defenses right on the offensive lines. They go for defense in depth. It's another reason they're in Ukraine right now, is to keep a depth of defense for the Russian nation. Anyway, so what does that mean? This is William's military opinion on the subject. Not a hell of a lot. There's no real importance to the counteroffensive in Robotyne because the counteroffensive has been effectively a non-starter. It just hasn't been very effective. So we do have some news on that. I've had Ellie on the side for. She has a report on BURISMA, and I'd like her to go ahead and give us the news on that. Ellie?
Well, we had Shokin come forward, and he is again verified that the corruption that was going on BURISMA since 2013. That's when BURISMA started. And the Biden administration, let me put me up here so you guys could see me. Whoop, we lost William there.
I'm very handsome.
It's still not letting me do William.
Ellie will find it here in a second.
All right, I'll just put me little. All right, so because this is real important. So he came out in the last couple days, and he wanted to say that he was part of 3 corruption offices across Ukraine for severe corruption, not only of the oligarchs, but those he called dictator leaders and BURISMA. And so he was looking into this. Now, Joe Biden and Hunter Biden got into BURISMA in 2013. So this Shokum was in their way from 213 on. So you can see when he, in 2016, I believe, William, I didn't look up dates, where he
Yeah,
fired.
16, 17 when
Well, I think it was 15 when he fired, because it was when he was still with Obama, and said that he was going to fire Shokum, and he did. And then, of course, I'm going to say he did, folks, because when he said it, they did it, and Shokum was gone. And
well,
so
he held their Vice President Biden was going to hold up their
aid.
Their international aid from the United States, and if they didn't comply with his need with BURISMA, right. And so they complied. You know, they need to survive as well as anybody else on Earth.
Right.
And, you know, it's not easy coming out from communism.
So what? Yeah, because you got to remember they were communist and then socialist. So they're to this day they're still socialist. So and leaning communist with Zelensky, and I'll tell you why here in a second. So now we got Shokum that was going after not only BURISMA for being corrupt, but for the whole country. Now we know they were corrupt because not only did in 2010 Biden got up before the Senate and claimed how corrupt Ukraine was. So in between 2010 and 2013, all of a sudden they weren't corrupt and he was into BURISMA. The other thing is, how did the blankets come up? This is something I don't think I've ever done with BURISMA. Well, Shokum left his people in place. They didn't fire his those that were looking into Ukraine and what was going on. So they were still looking into it. And when they found out that it was still corrupt, Obama stepped in and said, if you guys, and it wasn't on tape, this was in a written document, if they don't back off from these investigators for Shokum, they would only get blankets. And that's where the blankets came from. So if they didn't go away, then they wouldn't get the money after all. They would only get blankets. So what they did was they got rid of half of them, and a lot of what was put in place was what you've seen with the Zelensky phone call impeachment of Donald Trump. So I hope this makes sense to y'all. Hopefully it's all clicking. Now, in 2013, we seen many senators. McCain was one. William reminded me Kerry was over there. In 2015, we started seeing Lindsey Graham over there. I know I said her name wrong, Klobuchar. We seen Dick Durbin. We seen Leahy. Now, Leahy and Durbin were secretly over there, but when they started showing pictures of the corruption, then they had a picture of them being there trying to fight it. So they had to admit, this is the same time that we had the whole BURISMA thing going on, and CIA was over there, FBI was, they had everybody over there. Everybody was over there from 213. And then when the war started, now I want to let everyone know all my info comes from Eva, and she had videos. I don't know if she still got them on her page, Eva Bartlett, and she was showing where, and it was even on the main news for Ukraine of the what it was when Ukraine decided that they were going to go farther than the mercenaries, the Azov battalion, um, that were mercenaries, when they were possibly going to start striking, um, not Burisma, Russia, because now we had
the Donbass, the Zaporizhia region,
right,
the territories, yeah.
right, and what it was is Ukraine leaders, and this was the one before Zelensky, the one that was corrupt. He took millions, but get this: when he took millions, the Biden family got $17.2 million when he left. So,
Melanie, can I say something about this whole thing with Ukraine?
yeah.
So, folks out there need to understand that when you're in a communist state, everything is owned by the state. And basically, it's a race to the bottom, and thugs run everything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And so corruption is the game of the day, every day, for everything you get, every way you survive. Whether it's about religion, whether it's about getting an apartment, no matter what, food, it's all a corruption game. Mm-hmm. And you have to pay offs in order to survive, okay? Then in 91,
mm-hmm.
the wall comes down and the great Soviet Union collapses back into its original states. It dissolves as a union. Now you have a whole bunch of people traveling from all the way from East Berlin back to Russia, people from East Berlin back to East Berlin. You've got people moving all over these countries, Poland, Czechoslovakia. And in the process, then they become, over time, democratic socialist states. Okay? Now, you have to understand that communism is a type of socialism that makes everything owned by the state. And so socialism is still a functional part of these folks' minds, but they want to be able to have home rule or home vote on what kind of socialism they have. So in that way, they're a democracy, but they're a socialist democracy. And with that idea and that form of reasoning, corruption came about. Because remember, when everything was communist, everything was owned by the state. Then they had to privatize, okay, all of the state's assets, whether it's the oil companies, whether it's the electric companies, whether it's the sewer, water, you name it. It now needs to be privatized. It needs to be put in somebody's name. And oligarchs stood up. Mm-hmm. They were first in line. And who are these people? These were the corrupt people that ran the communist countries, okay? So they went from being communist, basically thugs, right? Secret police, to becoming oligarchs of different types of utilities and businesses and farming and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Okay? Industry, tourism,
and
ports.
then entered the United States, right? Then you've got the FSB. Everybody's intelligence agency is still all over each other's governments, right, in the East. And things are volatile. And at the same time, banking in the West is looking for a soft landing. Now, remember, we had all these public-private partnerships, and we had these foundations that were holding their assets in the banks in the Cayman Islands. Remember that back in the 2000s? And then that became a hot deal, and people started moving their money out of the Cayman Islands, and they started moving it to banks in Greece to do their money laundering.
Cyprus.
And then in 2008,
That was a Cyprus.
Greece started to collapse, and then they moved their banking to Ukraine. That was the next safe harbor. And so you can imagine everything that's involved in Ukraine. So not only do you have the oligarchs there that are corrupt, now you have foreign capital that are coming in to do money laundering in Ukraine. And so there's huge amounts of assets flowing into the Ukrainian state. And now you're starting to have officials saying, wait, this is even too corrupt by our communist standards. We want to prosecute this. And then comes this vice president saying, well, if you want foreign aid, you're going to have to step aside.
Now,
Okay,
William, so Cyprus, now before, just a little bit before Cyprus is when they started moving the money over to Ukraine. Now, William Barr was over investigating Cyprus, and he shut everything down. And it seems, from what I'm hearing from my reporters over in Ukraine, everything moved to Ukraine, and that's when money started disappearing under Zelensky, that they don't keep tabs on it, but the banks are filling up, and so are the foundations.
So Barr put an end to it in Greek Cypriot Island, and then, but he didn't freeze the assets.
No.
So they just moved.
Yeah.
It was a meaningless act on his part.
It was a cleanup, man.
It would have been better if they'd left it in Greece, because at least it was visible.
Yeah. Well, I call him the cleanup man, and that's what I think he is still. And I think he's embarrassed that he could be caught, and is why he left so soon. Now I want to get back to, what you were talking about with, you said about the 1990s, and now, in 2005, we did know that someone from the State Department was over in Ukraine, and what they
believe that to be Victoria Nuland.
That's what I'm thinking, but I couldn't find enough proof that she's the one that discovered this. It just says in 2005, mass graves of business persons, judges, lawyers, investigators were discovered in Donetsk.
So Victoria Nuland was Secretary of State for that region, right? All the way back into the presidency of George Bush, Jr. And so she's been operative over there from that time on, from Dick Cheney's reign all the way until Trump set her aside, and then after Trump left office, she came back into the State Department, and she's been under Secretary of State ever since.
And then now, from 2005 to 2010, according to the United States, the former governor of Donetsk, impeached President Yankovic, had ties to organized crime as part of the political party. So when he left, he took a huge amount of money with him. Now in 2014,
now, remember, communism was basically state-run organized crime.
Right. Well, they called it kleptocracy.
Kleptocracy, yeah.
Yeah, kleptocracy. I can't say it. You had it right.
Kleptocracy.
Right. Now, in 2014, Euromaidan uprising, which broke out after Viktor Yankovic refused to sign a trade deal with the European Union, and it led to a widespread protest in Kyiv. Now, what I heard was this was just a small part of it. What it was is Ukraine was telling all Russians to get out of Ukraine. And the reasoning for it was Ukraine was going to be Ukraine and Russia was going to be Russia. And
well,
what
they were going to be part of the European Union. And also, I don't think that the European Union wanted to have Russians able to travel freely through the European Union through Ukraine.
So right. So what they did was they gathered up everybody that was Russian or Russian Ukraine, and they told them that they had to basically sign on the dotted line. They would be only Ukraine. They had to give up their Russian culture, their Russian language, their Russian family and friends, and they had to move away from the border states that were being taken care of by, and this is by Eva and her and my reporters. This is what they were saying. They had to move away because Russia was taking care of 50%, Ukraine 50%, and what it was is there was Ukrainians with Russians in those states that were family members. And so they grabbed them all up and they said, you have to decide one or the other. You're either Ukraine or you're Russian. And Eva and quite a few of the reporters, one that came up missing, he had actual pictures of Ukrainian soldiers or the Azov battalion taking Russians out, the ones that would not side and they would not leave because of family, friends, their jobs. They were established, they had a house, everything, and took them out and killed them, and even kids. That's when the flee to Crimea happened. All of these individuals fled to Crimea. But William, what got me, and I don't like Putin for this, is 2 years before they fled. Putin moved in and took over Crimea. And then all of a sudden this was going on and they all fled there. And then, of course, Russia.
Keep in mind there were Russian operatives moving around in
Crimea,
the disputed territories, as well as the Azov battalion.
Yeah.
And
well, there was a war. I've spoke about this in 12 viewers, but we got a lot of new ones now since I did BURISMA. There was mercenaries on both sides. And now, was it the Wagner group or was it the? Now, I heard townspeople that when Ukraine started marching into their town, they wanted to stand up for their town, their houses, their homes, all that, and joined with the mercenaries.
Territorial Defense Forces.
Right. And this had been going back and forth since 2014. So, and it went on and on until Russia.
2001, Ellie. It's been going on really since 2001 and the fall of the Soviet Union.
That's right.
There's been this back and forth.
Disputed territories.
Treaties were made by the United States so that nuclear weapons would be returned to Russia so that they could be under Russian control, and the United States didn't have to worry about nuclear weapons ending up on the weapons market. And so there's a whole rolling boil of things going on right after the fall of the Soviet Union. You got to remember, when the Soviet Union fell, it became a nuclear arsenal without a nation,
right?
Literally. And the United States had to go in and secure all those weapons and get them someplace that the United States didn't have to worry about them turning up on the black market where terrorists could get hold of them and use them against the United States.
And it was so corrupt there that in Ukraine, up to, I don't want to say it stopped at Zelensky because it kept going. Because even when Trump was in office, he had to put in another corruption uh, um, center
Probe.
to try to get rid of the rest of the corruption. They were saying it was corrupt all the way to 2018. And then
Yeah,
come to find
and the
out,
United States has been trying to. There's been two forces in the United States. There's been one group trying to exploit the corruption in Ukraine. Okay,
hmm
there's always, remember, there's always two factions in a government, and then you had a new faction that came in with the Trump organization that said, no, we're going to police this up and reduce the amount of corruption in Ukraine so that they can be stabilized and we don't have to worry about Russia coming across the border because it would be a military issue to the United States. And Trump is right on that. But he didn't arm them. What he did was just made it so that Russia believed that if they came into Ukraine heavy, that the United States would come in heavy. And so that satiated the Russians for the time Trump was in office because, frankly, Russian Wagner thought Trump was a little bit crazy.
Now,
a little bit off. And so they were terrified of him, and so they were very hesitant to do anything against the United States while he was in office. And Wagner even did a probe at the Conoco refinery in Syria, and Trump had them basically destroyed. They just wiped them out, the Wagner group. 50% of them died within a day. So Russia believed that Trump would use the military, especially after Trump believed that there was gas used on children in Syria, and he delivered all those Tomahawk weapons or missiles. I think there were 40 of them fired off from submarines and destroyers into Syria. So everybody believed Russia or Trump was capable of instantaneous action if he believed there was a threat to world peace or the United States out there. So everybody behaved for quite a while. But as soon as Biden got into office, it became evident that, especially after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, that this was a weak president, and everybody could start tiptoeing out into their own internal conflicts. Because you got to remember, Russia sees this as an internal conflict. They don't see it as necessarily an external conflict.
Yeah.
Just like China doesn't believe Taiwan is an external conflict. They believe it's an internal conflict. And so these more aggressive countries, especially the superpowers, said, hey, look, we can tippy toe out into this and see if we can exploit this to a degree or settle old scores, to a degree. And if nothing is done, well, then we're right. And so, of course, Putin did what he did, believing that the United States and NATO would bring in medium range and short range missiles onto his border.
Well,
and that threatens both Moscow, St. Petersburg, and there's that town to the south that's the most important military point in Russia. And if those can be reached with short, medium range missiles, then Russia was under threat, just like we believed it when Cuba in 1962 Russia put, or the Soviet Union put medium-range missiles onto Cuba. Okay, and we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is what we're watching right now, the equivalent of the missile crisis we had in the United States. It just happens to be the Russian missile crisis. Okay, so all these things are going on simultaneously: the banking, the corruption, the fear from the West, and also remember, Putin to a degree doesn't want to go to war with Ukraine because Ukraine are Christian Slavs, just like Russian is. The only difference is they're Ukrainian Orthodox Christians as opposed to Russian Orthodox Christians. Okay, so he doesn't really want to go to war with them. Plus, he understands Russians that don't want to be Russians, i.e., Ukrainians, would be terrible if they were incorporated into Russia, right? And so Russia had a vested interest in Ukrainians being moved out of the disputed territories, and Ukraine had a vested interest in Russians being moved out, and so we end up with basically a civil war.
Yeah. Now, according to the Department of Defense, corruption in 2019 went back. It went down quite a bit under the Trump administration. And then in 2019, it started building back up to where they say right now, corruption in Ukraine is worse than it was before the Euro-Maiden War. So it's worse now.
So during the Soviet Union, all funds flowed out of Moscow. Okay, right now, all the funds coming into Ukraine flow out of the United States. So they've gone back to a basic state that they were when they were under the Soviet Union, just being funded by the United States instead. Now, is that money being tracked? Well, we can guarantee a quarter to a third is being siphoned off just for profits and for bank accounts and for things like, yachts and homes abroad and, fine clothes and the things that people in the United States don't have, but the taxpayers are paying for some of the oligarchs in Russia or in Ukraine to have at this point.
Yeah.
So we have fueled both a war and at the same time corruption in Ukraine since the beginning of the war.
Yeah. So so when we move on to the phone call with Zelensky and Trump, at that point, they were at the height of corruption, according to the reporters. Now, when they were pointing out that they were getting missiles, and this was the very beginning of the Trump administration, before we even sent them launchers, they were getting launchers and missiles. And we were thinking, or the reporters were thinking, it might have been Iran. Well, one of the reporters had a lot of intel on this, and they ended up capturing him, and he ended up dead. Ukraine captured him. And he ended up dead. And then what they did is they gathered up all the press and said, you got to have a press on you. And they started leading them to different sites. So Eva and her group decided they wanted to look in and see what was going on. And that's when we're finding that Ukraine was just weakened within the first few months of the war. And so we had to help them out. And why? Because Russia did invade Ukraine. And a lot of emails I get saying, well, you say Russia didn't invade. Yeah, they invaded. But they only took, they were screaming the Minsk agreement. And you don't hear about that no more. Now it's just the threats that go back and forth. Now, what happened in Crimea?
Putin believed that Ukraine would fall within days. And so he didn't bother just going into the disputed territories, he was going to shut down Kyiv.
Yeah,
right?
and then it was going to be,
And make
a second
Belarus, make it just like the Belarus, right?
Yeah.
As a buff. But his military was so corrupt that they fell apart in the face of the Ukrainian defense forces.
Yeah.
So they fell back to positions they could hold, and it's just been a struggle ever since.
Yeah. And when we look into the holdings with BURISMA, because let's say with Crimea. Now, Crimea seems to have settled down, and many still flee there out of these debated states. And then, of course, we moved on to the war. Now,
Ellie, you also have to remember that Gazprom from Russia, its main gas and oil pipelines moved right through the center of Ukraine.
That's right.
And Ukraine did the smart thing of shutting it down for a short time as a type of political protest. Well, the Russians saw that as a threat to the Russian state. And from that time on, Ukraine was a target.
Yep, they sure were. And I'm trying to kind of move ahead and skip through this as best I can with BURISMA. Now, when BURISMA was basically exposed, the Biden family turned on Devon Archer, and he was charged in Ukraine. Nobody knows how long he spent in jail. I heard it wasn't very long. But he was their fall guy. Well, now look at Devon Archer. Now Devon Archer's telling what he knows. And now they have disowned him. But to me, they disowned him a long time ago when they had him be the fall guy. And then we heard about Shokum. And of course, the impeachment didn't happen. And
remember, all these people are cultivated as fall people in the event of an oh my God situation for these corrupt individuals.
So if they arrest anybody over there or they snag anybody, then expect them to be doing something they don't want you to see in this war. Is it right for Russia to do what he's doing? Well, according to those in like Belarus and a few other places that are taken, that they can now live across the street from friends or family, and they don't have to have them removed and get this, put into a re-education camp. Canada's got one too. Canada is moving people into re-education camps. So this is China moving forward with these countries. So when we look at Devon Archer turning over info, take it as fact. Whatever the Bidens say, take it with a grain of salt, because this guy was very tall, 7'4", I believe, and he had 14-inch shoes, and they were huge. Oh boy. So. The other thing,
information coming out of Ukraine then was more accurate.
Right.
Only after the war began did the news out of Ukraine completely collapse.
Right. Now the other thing, William, I meant to ask you before the show. Now we heard that Russia did use some of the Afghanistan. Now is that Wagner that was with them when they were fighting Syria?
So yeah, in Syria, they used Wagner as not as just as their ground troops, but they used Wagner Wagner wherever they want to have plausible deniability.
So Afghan Russian war.
Now, during the Afghan-Russian war, that was Russian regulars.
Okay, that wasn't the Wagner group?
That was a 10-year war,
Mm-hmm.
and we supplied the Mujahideen, who are still against the Taliban to this day, with Stinger missiles, shoulder-fired missiles, and Toyota pickup trucks. We gave them Toyota pickup trucks because they were just about like having an Air Force. They'd use those pickup trucks to get to the top of the passes, to the top of the mountains and whatnot. And when the Russian helicopters and Air Force came through, they'd shoot them down.
Mm-hmm.
And so that went on for 10 years until Russia decided, you know what, Afghanistan's just not worth it, and they pulled out.
Mm-hmm. But that's what was in a lot of these reports was the Wagner group was maybe part of that, and they moved and was a part of Syria. Then they were retraining in Pakistan, Afghanistan, just for to help Russia with Ukraine.
Yeah, Wagner became really an entity during the Libyan thing. Russia started standing up, or Wagner started standing up a mercenary force. And then it's become more and more useful, okay, to the Russian state over time and became more and more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Until they had an insurrection against Moscow and, you know, basically got deported to Belarus.
Mm-hmm.
That's one part of Wagner, but there's still another active part of Wagner in Africa.
Yes.
And
they have been doing well there.
Followers of Wagner are still active. They're still working for the Russian state.
Right.
The ones in Belarus are training right now and being integrated into more control through the Russian military. But they're going to be maintained as a mercenary group, but Prigozhin is now just out of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's really changed. It's just that Prigozhin,
it's still corrupt.
Can't threaten the Russian leader.
Right. And, you know, Russia is. I can't say they have a wall, but they are. He's protecting his own. And I think that's what we're seeing established, like even in the Middle East, of Saudi Arabia stepping up and protecting their own. Iran, all of these countries are now starting to protect their own. Now, when we go back to,
because in the past they've leaned on the United States to maintain,
and they got more
a degree of peace on their borders, right?
Right.
But now that explicit protection is not there. They can't depend upon that. And so if you can't depend upon something, you have to come up with, you know, anytime there's a vacuum, it has to be filled by somebody. And do you want it to be by another superpower, or would you rather fill that military vacuum on your own and protect your people? This is a logical progression of what happens during a weak leadership of the superpower.
Yes. And the thing is it's
not the United States' fault necessarily. It's just a natural progression if this sort of thing occurs, okay? It's not like certain people believe that you can talk your way out of anything, all right? Others believe that the only way to stop the wolf at the door is to be a wolf themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're with the talkers right now, and the wolves with the wolf at the door aren't buying it.
That's right. And, you know, so now we're looking at, I was talking about the mercenaries on each side fighting for about it, I'm going to say 5 to 8 years before the big war busted out. And then we've seen the Azov battalion become very big. And Russia has always said from the beginning that those are um, um, KKK, white supremacists. They're mercenaries. They're gangsters. Has always portrayed them very badly. And
Now, remember in Ukraine that when the Nazis came through, there were a lot of sympathizers
mm-hmm,
in Ukraine with the Nazi movement. Why? Because they were going to attack their arch enemy for 1,000 years, Russia, right?
yep.
And so, yeah, they're going to be sympathizers. Then Russia beats back the Nazis and pushes them through Ukraine. Well, those Nazi sympathizers are still there,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the partisans that fought against the Nazi
Yeah.
sympathizers, and the Nazis are still there.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been simmering and brewing ever since 1945.
Basically after World War II. And a lot of people think the Nazis ran. They ran to Ukraine. They ran to South America, and it was all said and done. They all filtered right back in. Just didn't wear the Nazi SS uniform again.
Now remember the SS, a lot of them ran to Argentina. But when the Soviet Union fell, they now had an opportunity to run towards a Slavic country, right? And so a lot of them left Argentina and came back. Well, they didn't necessarily come back into Germany, where there's a lot of U.S. influence, where they'd be identified. And so where do you think they went?
Yeah. Yep, that's it. And even there is so much propaganda that comes out out of Ukraine. The first few big, large amount of men that was killed, one was a graveyard, and they filmed people out of the graveyard. And some of them they made kind of sit up and look alive, and others they were just dead. There was no moving them.
And remember, the Nazis that came back now had an opportunity to make money again. They didn't have that opportunity in Argentina. They had an opportunity to have a little land, have a little protection, but they didn't have a large opportunity. But when they came back to Ukraine, when they came back to Czechoslovakia, when they came back to Belarus, well, now they could go into business, right?
Yeah.
And remember, the Nazis are a nationalized business group. That National Socialism is where you nationalize the companies, you direct them, but they're owned by individuals.
Yeah.
And these Nazis understood how to operate in that sort of socialist system. And so Ukraine and Belarus and Czechoslovakia and Hungary were just automatic, just perfect places for them to just go back into business.
Yeah. And a lot of the families moved back, but because they lived there, they only ran so they wouldn't be arrested or part of the. We had World War II there, so they left and they came back and they rebuilt.
The Mossad was hunting Nazis at the same time. Remember, they were going to Argentina and hunting Nazis. They found a Nazi here, I think, in Michigan. Anyway.
But for the most part.
So the Nazis didn't feel safe in Argentina anymore, so they might as well come back and go into business.
And
by going into business, they become legitimate. And because they become legitimate, they become untouchable. And because they become untouchable, Mossad will go someplace else.
Yeah. And then a lot of them moved to Ukraine. And even the Azov Battalion has said that Zelensky was a part of it at one time, briefly. But they claim they are the grandchildren of the SS, Nazis, scientists, generals, basically out of World War II. So,
well, remember, anytime a military force moves through an area, okay, the VC French a lot of the French ladies suddenly had Nazi boyfriends, right?
That's right.
Suddenly had German boyfriends because they were in power and
Yeah.
they wanted to survive. Well,
Yeah.
the same thing happened.
And
in
even
Ukraine.
after the war, the military of Germany is when they started seeing the missiles, I think even a submarine, that their fleets, their navy, everything built up after Hitler was gone.
Sure. And so as soon as Hitler was gone, then they had to worry about the United States. The United States had a big navy, and so Russia now had to produce a navy to protect the Russian shoreline, right?
Right.
That was their idea. And then they got a bigger navy, and then they said to themselves, why don't we go out into the open oceans like the United States, and let's push back that whole idea of self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
And for communism to survive, communism must grow. It's
Yes.
not like in the United States where we can just have free enterprise and become a rich nation. That's not the way communism works. Communism
Mm-hmm.
works by consuming other nations as they move forward, the same way that Nazism survives
Mm-hmm.
over time.
Yeah.
So, but Nazism is a little less aggressive than communism. But if you give communism a reason, they're off to the races.
Yeah.
All right.
So in the 80s, you're talking 40 years later.
Both sides sprinkled each other's countries with their offspring.
Mm-hmm. And it just became a corruption after that, trying to keep it either communist or socialism over there. And they did
and the kings and queens of those areas, the dukes, these were the aristocracy for 1,000 years. They haven't gone away.
No, they just got
just
worse.
Been pushed into the background, and they go to each other's parties in each other's countries, and they're part of the aristocracy and the oligarchs. They're just a little less than these powerful oligarchs, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they want back in power. And so they're going to go along with the Nazis. They're going to feed the Nazis, or they're going to feed the Russians, or whomever. They don't really care as long as they go back to a state where kings and queens rule the land.
Yeah.
And they want to go back to feudalism. So you've got the feudalist group, you've got the Nazi group, and you've got the communist group, all vying for the same territory at the same time. It's a complete mess.
Yeah. Now, and then, by the 90s, 1990s, what we seen was exactly what you're talking about. They were looking, even the United States with this was looking for a country over there that they could all pour their money into. It wouldn't be them. No, it's not us. Not us. It's this country that's doing it. Now, and I believe, William, when you look back in by 2000 or after the Clintons, because we know that Hillary went not only to Ukraine, she went to Russia. She was all over the place over there. And then we started seeing that all of a sudden, all this money into mid 2000s, all the way to till now, of our money, and not only our money, but money from Europe and other places, was all starting to pour the money into Ukraine. And then, of course, it's corrupt. They got go ahead.
So during Vietnam, we had a serious drug problem coming out of the Iron Triangle. And because of that, those monies had to be put someplace. Those monies had to be laundered somewhere. Mm-hmm. And they built up. Mm-hmm. And after the Iron Triangle, the Vietnam period, it was Colombia, or it was mm-hmm. Nicaragua, or it was Brazil. These drugs,
Iraq,
and this drug money and arms money had to be held someplace. Mm-hmm. And it couldn't be held in the United States.
No. And so I really think that, William, by the time we got to um, the Obama administration, I don't think Bush was the Middle East. And then once they started crippling the Middle East, then it had to be, now it was time to take Russia.
Well,
Russia.
they wanted oil money to go along with their drug money and arms money.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And of course, Soviet Union had the oil, and that's what they're. I think that's really what they're after. But we see them pouring the money into Ukraine for now. 2015, 16, going into 2020, we now see them saying it's not us, but we got to help poor Ukraine. Well, they have been claiming Ukraine has been corrupt all these years, all the way. And they are even stating now that from 2020 till now is the most corrupt Ukraine has ever been. But no one's talking about it. And guess who has all the money over there? The Biden family. They have bought up all the old.
The Wild West. Ukraine is the Wild West of Europe.
And BURISMA was just a start. They bought into other gas and oil companies. They bought into all of the old.
They had gas. They had minerals.
Mm-hmm.
They had coal.
Yep.
They had oil.
Mm-hmm.
They had manufacturing and shipping. Remember,
Mm-hmm.
you have Odessa.
Yep.
You have all that going on. And to top it off, you've got the most fertile soil on Earth. I mean, literally, you can plant a tire and it will grow.
It'll grow a car. No, I'm teasing. Plant a tire, grow a car.
Well, the point is if you drop a seed in Ukraine, it's going to sprout.
Yeah.
In the United States, if you fertilize it, you cultivate it, you give it all the perfect conditions, it may sprout. But you drop it in Ukraine, it's absolutely going to sprout.
Mm-hmm. Not only that, but there was 5 old, like Wuhan, that the NIH had taken over with the backing of.
They had the labs.
The labs. I'm sorry, I just couldn't figure out what the word was.
Yeah, they had laboratories there.
Right, and it was old, and
as soon as the Soviet Union fell, IBM rushed in there, right? And they were having them build hard drives and stuff for computers. Tech flooded in there at the very first, because you have to remember, even though they're corrupt, even though they were communists, communists made sure that their population all went to college.
Yeah.
So they were well educated.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as the tech boom happened, guess what? It was a cheap place where there were highly educated people that they could start doing some of their computer work. So hard drives were being built there for a while. There were microchips and electronic components being produced there. The Soviet Union had a dominance in high-powered tubes. So like tubes for your guitar amplifiers, for your high-power communications. In the last 40 years, it's been the Eastern Europe, that has produced. Like Sovotech is one of the big tube suppliers that are left in the world. And so if you have high-power communications that require a high-powered tube, guess what? It comes from that region because they're well-educated. They know how to manufacture those. It's an older technology, and we've moved on in our technologies to solid state, but the old Soviet Union had older technologies that were still relevant for certain communications, like high-powered radio transmitters and stuff like that.
Yeah. And so really, what I was saying was BURISMA was a start of even them getting the labs and and it was the Biden family. Uh, they were quickly gathering up as much as they could, and that's why a lot of the people in Ukraine call Biden the president there. Now, the newest that's happened that really shocked even the Ukrainians was the three oligarchs that ran away with millions of dollars of Ukraine's money. They finally did arrest them, but they let them go. And they say they're okay. Russia wants them, but Ukraine said, even though they took all that money and they're corrupt uh, and they're living high on the hog off our money, we're not gonna charge them.
Remember, these people are children of dukes.
Yeah.
The generals in Ukraine were part of the aristocracy from
Mhm.
feudal times, right? You don't kill the top echelons of your society, so they just exile them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's it.
You can't go and kill your best friend's kid, right? If you're a leader of Ukraine, you can't go kill one of your protege's children. So you just exile
Is
them.
that what they're doing
You
to
don't
Hunter
exile them
in a
forever.
way?
You just exile them until people forget.
Isn't that kind of what they're doing to Hunter? If Joe Biden is like Zelensky's like his adopted son almost,
Well,
you
of
can't.
course,
Of
because
course, you're not going to do nothing to your own son Hunter of ripping off half of Ukraine and keeping it
remember,
corrupt.
Democrats have the socialist tendencies,
Hmm.
and they look at Ukraine that is socialist and say, why not?
Yeah,
Right?
that's
So
it.
not only do we corrupt Ukraine, but Ukraine corrupts, guess who? Us.
Yeah,
Just like Vietnam did.
and
You can't wade into a war. You can't wade into a war, whether it's an intelligence war or a combat war, without the war taking control of you to some degree.
it makes sense, William, that this is why NATO don't want Ukraine. It's corrupt, and they know it. And
Well, Ukraine, NATO to a degree is corrupt as well. Remember?
well, yeah, but at the same time, it's a loose cannon of corruption that's going to
Right. There's a
bark. They're
cannon
going
on
to
the gun
bark.
deck. You're absolutely right.
They're going to bark, and it's going to expose not only NATO but Europe and Germany and Poland. It's gonna open it wide to, like we were just talking about with the
Europe
kings and
functions
the
on
queens and the.
nepotism. Europe functions on nepotism, just like the Democratic Party does.
Yep.
And you don't step out of line. And Ukrainians have a tendency to step the hell out of line.
Yeah. So, but I know you got other news, and I think we really flipped Burisma and Ukraine to show people not only the history of how corrupt they are, but they've become more and more and more and more corrupt. The lowest time they were in corruption was when Trump was in office, and Zelensky hit during that time, they say.
So,
And then once Biden got in, then Zelensky was out in the open and, hey, I'm your buddy. I'm your buddy.
so Biden's been involved, and the Democrats have been involved, but the Republicans have been
Since
just
1990s.
involved, right?
Mm-hmm.
So both factions have been involved in the government, and this is what happens when major nations come apart. Now, guess what's going to happen when China comes apart?
Yeah. Yep.
We're going to see this. It's going to be Ukraine 2.0 in uh, Beijing or someplace near there, right?
Yeah.
So this is what happens when
It's
there's
why they
these
had
same things.
BRICS, and they got these guys to agree maybe to switch to the Chinese dollar, because that's a way to keep their country from collapsing.
And anytime a government falls, all the governments around it, security forces and whatnot, rush in. You can't have a vacuum. It's against the laws of nature. Okay, do you want me to go on?
Yeah, go ahead. We're already over the hour, but I mean, we sometimes
So
go
I'll just
hour and a
add this
half.
one
So
thing about Damascus, Syria is blaming Israel over strikes in Aleppo near the airport. Israel Defense Forces have also patrolled into the West Bank and have grabbed up a couple terrorists that have been involved there. And Israel says that it will continue targeted strikes against Hamas and its Iranian proxies. So, and also Israel's continuing preparations for all-out war with Iran. I've got pages of other stuff we could talk about here, but I'll just save them for Wednesday, and we'll have them then, because we're at the end. So if you guys have enjoyed this discussion and enjoyed this information, please like and subscribe and share with your friends. And we hope you have a good rest of your day. And thank you for enjoying the information we could bring to you. And we try to bring you the most truthful information we can get our hands on. And if by chance you find out something we said is wrong, let us know so that we can apologize and say so. We're not interested in giving you bad information. We would like it to be as truthful as we can, but you know what? Sometimes we'll make a mistake. It happens every once in a while. And if we do, we're more than willing to say, you know, guess what? We got it wrong. But, you know, thank you for enjoying our time here in, you know, Miki's Den and the YouTube and Facebook land, and have a good evening. So goodbye for until tomorrow.
Have a nice week, folks. And William will see you next Monday for his show. If not, you can catch us on Wednesday for the World War III report. Good show, huh?